The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store, and Hannah Dawson pressed one trembling hand against her swollen belly as she peered through the dusty window at Ruby City, Idaho, knowing that in mere moments she would have to face the man who believed he was marrying a respectable widow. The August heat of 1882 shimmered off the wooden boardwalks, and her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs as the driver opened the door and extended his weathered hand to help her down. She had written to Russell Garrett 3 months ago, answering his advertisement for a mail-order bride, but she had not mentioned the pregnancy, had not explained that she was fleeing Philadelphia in disgrace after the father of her unborn child had abandoned her without a second thought. Her legs felt unsteady as her boots touched the dry Idaho ground, and she could not help but notice the curious stares from the townsfolk who had gathered to witness the arrival of their local rancher's intended bride. The dusty main street of Ruby City stretched before her, with its handful of buildings. A far cry from the bustling streets of Philadelphia, where she had grown up in modest comfort before everything had fallen apart. She smoothed down her traveling dress, which she had carefully selected to hide her condition as much as possible, though at 5 months along, it was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal the truth. "Miss Dawson?" The voice came from behind her, deep and steady, and she turned to find herself looking up at a man who stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. Russell Garrett removed his hat, revealing dark hair that fell across his forehead, and his gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was younger than she had imagined from his letters, perhaps 30 years old, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days' worth of stubble, and hands that looked capable of both hard work and surprising gentleness. "Mr. Garrett." She managed to keep her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "I am pleased to finally meet you in person." He nodded slowly, his gaze traveling over her face as though committing every feature to memory, and then he reached for her trunk that the driver had unloaded. "The ride from Boise must have been rough. You look tired." There was no judgment in his tone, only a quiet concern that made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had prepared herself for anger, for rejection, for the inevitable moment when he would discover her secret and send her back east in shame, but she had not prepared herself for kindness. "It was a long journey," she admitted, and then, because she could not bear to deceive him any longer, she added, "Mr. Garrett, there is something I must tell you before we proceed any further. Something I should have included in my letters but did not have the courage to share." His expression did not change, though she saw his fingers tighten slightly on the handle of her trunk. "Best we discuss such matters in private. My wagon is just down the street, and my ranch is about an hour's ride from town. We can talk there." He settled his hat back on his head and gestured for her to walk beside him, and she found herself following this stranger who held her entire future in his calloused hands. The townspeople watched as they made their way to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 strong horses, and Hannah could feel the weight of their speculation. She wondered what stories Russell had told about his mail-order bride, what expectations he had built in his mind during the months of correspondence. His letters had been practical and straightforward, describing his cattle ranch and the hard work required to maintain it, explaining that he needed a wife who could handle the isolation and the challenges of frontier life. He had asked for honesty and resilience, and she had provided him with carefully worded half-truths and desperate hope. Russell helped her onto the wagon seat with a gentle grip on her elbow, and she could not help but notice the strength in his touch, the way he made sure she was settled before he climbed up beside her. He released the brake and clicked his tongue to set the horses moving, and soon they were leaving Ruby City behind, heading into the rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and the occasional stand of pine trees. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, and Hannah was grateful when Russell reached behind the seat and produced a canteen of water. "Drink," he said simply. "The heat here takes some getting used to if you are from back east." She accepted the canteen and took several long swallows, tasting the metallic tang of well water, and then she handed it back to him. "Thank you." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and she knew she could not delay the conversation any longer. "Mr. Garrett, I need to tell you the truth about my situation." He kept his eyes on the dusty road ahead, his jaw set in a firm line. "Go on." Hannah folded her hands in her lap, pressing them against the curve of her belly that her dress could no longer fully hide. "I am not a widow, as I led you to believe in my letters. I have never been married." She forced herself to continue despite the shame that burned in her chest. "I am with child, due in approximately 4 months. The father wanted nothing to do with me once he learned of my condition, and my own family turned me out. I came west because I had nowhere else to go and no other options available to me." The wagon rolled on for several long moments in silence, and Hannah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had known this moment would come, had rehearsed a dozen different versions of this confession during the long journey from Philadelphia, but nothing had prepared her for the actual reality of admitting her disgrace to a man who had every right to send her away. She waited for his anger, for his disgust, for him to turn the wagon around and deposit her back at the stagecoach station. Instead, Russell pulled the horses to a stop and turned to face her fully for the first time since they had left town. His gray eyes searched her face with an expression she could not quite read, something between surprise and calculation, and perhaps a hint of compassion. "How old are you, Miss Dawson?" 23, she answered, confused by the question. "And the man who left you in this condition, did he force himself on you?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "No, I believed we would marry. I was foolish and trusting, and I made a terrible mistake." Russell nodded slowly and looked out across the landscape of his ranch land, which stretched as far as the eye could see in every direction. "I have worked this land for 8 years, built it up from nothing with my own 2 hands after my parents died. It is a hard life, Miss Dawson, and a lonely one. I wrote for a bride because I want a family, want children to pass this ranch on to when my time comes. I want a partner who can stand beside me through difficult seasons and help build something that will last." He turned back to her, and the intensity in his gaze made her heart skip. "I do not care about your past or the mistakes you made in Philadelphia. What matters to me is whether you are willing to work hard, be honest from this day forward, and help me build the future I have been dreaming of." Hannah could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You would still marry me, even knowing that I am carrying another man's child?" "This child will have my name," Russell said firmly, and the conviction in his voice left no room for doubt. "If you agree to be my wife, then any child you bring into this world will be mine in every way that matters. I will raise him or her as my own, and no one in Ruby City or anywhere else will say otherwise." The tears that had been threatening spilled over, streaming down her cheeks in hot tracks. "Why would you do this? You do not know me. I have lied to you and deceived you." Russell reached out and, with surprising gentleness, wiped one of her tears away with his thumb. "I know what it is like to be alone in this world, with no one to turn to. When my parents died of fever, I was 17 years old, with nothing but this land and a half-built cabin. Folks in town thought I would fail, thought I should sell out and move on, but a few good people gave me a chance when they did not have to. Maybe it is time I paid that kindness forward." He dropped his hand and picked up the reins again. "Besides, I meant what I said in my letters. I need a wife and a family. If you're willing to take on this life with me, then we can make it work." Hannah pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed by the unexpected mercy being offered to her. She had prepared herself for rejection, had steeled herself for the possibility of having to find work in town as a seamstress or laundress while pregnant and unmarried, had even considered the terrifying prospect of having to move on to another town where no one knew her. But here was this man, this stranger who owed her nothing, offering her not just a marriage of convenience, but acceptance and protection for her unborn child. "I will work harder than you can imagine," she promised through her tears. "I will be a good wife to you, Mr. Garrett. I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret this decision." "Then we have an understanding." Russell set the horses moving again, and the wagon continued its journey toward the ranch. "And you should call me Russell. We will be married as soon as we can arrange it with the preacher, hopefully within the next few days. No sense in delaying and giving people reason to gossip more than they already will." The ranch house came into view as they crested a hill, and Hannah felt her breath catch at the sight of it. The structure was larger than she had expected, a solid 2-story building with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. Beyond it stood a barn and several outbuildings, and she could see cattle grazing in the distant pastures. Everything spoke of hard work and careful planning, of a man who had built something substantial from the ground up through sheer determination. Russell helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk up the porch steps. "It is not fancy, but it is sturdy and well built. The roof does not leak, and the stove works well. I have been doing my own cooking and cleaning, so you will probably find things not quite to your liking, but you can arrange the house however suits you best." He pushed open the front door and stood aside to let her enter first. The interior was dim after the bright sunshine outside, and Hannah blinked as her eyes adjusted. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace at one end and a black iron stove near the opposite wall. The furniture was simple but well made, and while the space was decidedly masculine in its sparse decoration, it was clean and organized. A staircase led to the second floor, and Russell gestured toward it. "There are 3 bedrooms upstairs. I have been using the largest one, but you can take your pick of the others for now." His meaning was clear, and Hannah felt a rush of gratitude that he was not expecting to claim his marital rights immediately. "Once we are properly married, we can discuss other arrangements." "Thank you," she said softly. "You are being far kinder to me than I deserve." Russell set her trunk down at the base of the stairs. "We all deserve a second chance, Miss Dawson. The question is what we do with it once we get it." He moved to the stove and checked the fire. "I will heat some water so you can wash up, and then I will fix us some supper. Tomorrow I will ride into town and speak with Preacher Morrison about performing the ceremony. Do you have a dress suitable for a wedding?" Hannah thought of the few garments packed in her trunk. Most of them let out as much as possible to accommodate her changing figure. "I have a blue dress that is my best, though I am not sure it will fit properly for much longer. It will be fine." Russell's tone was matter of fact as he filled a pot with water from a bucket. "This is not going to be a fancy affair. Just you, me, the preacher, and maybe a witness or two from town. The important thing is making it legal and proper, so there are no questions about your status or the child's legitimacy." Over the next few days, Hannah discovered that Russell Garrett was a man of his word. He rode into Ruby City the morning after her arrival and returned with news that Preacher Morrison had agreed to perform the ceremony in 3 days' time. He also brought back fabric for a new dress, though Hannah protested that her blue dress would suffice. "You should have something new for your wedding day," Russell said, setting the wrapped parcel on the kitchen table. "Mrs. Chen at the general store said this color would suit you, and she is usually right about such things." Hannah unwrapped the fabric to find a beautiful dove, gray cotton with tiny sprigs of white flowers. It was practical enough for everyday wear after the wedding, but pretty enough to be special, and the thoughtfulness of the gesture made her throat tight with emotion. "It is lovely, thank you." She spent the next 2 days sewing the dress, adjusting the pattern to accommodate her growing belly, while Russell worked on the ranch. He left early each morning to tend to his cattle, and returned in the late afternoon. And during the evenings they sat together at the kitchen table, sharing simple meals and tentative conversations. Hannah learned that Russell had been born in Missouri, that his parents had brought him west when he was a boy chasing the promise of better land, and that he had learned ranching from his father before fever had taken both his parents within days of each other. "I almost gave up after they died," Russell admitted one evening as they finished a supper of fried potatoes and salt pork. "The loneliness nearly drove me mad that first year, but then I realized that giving up would mean everything they had sacrificed would have been for nothing. So I kept working, kept building, and eventually the loneliness just became part of the routine." "You must have considered finding a wife before now," Hannah said, gathering their plates to wash. Russell leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes thoughtful. "I did a few times. There was a girl in town I courted for a while about 5 years ago, but she decided ranch life was too hard and married a shopkeeper instead. After that, I figured I needed someone who knew what they were getting into, someone willing to commit before they arrived. That is why I placed the advertisement." He paused, then added, "I never expected someone like you to answer." "Someone with such scandalous baggage, you mean?" Hannah tried to keep her tone light, but she could not quite hide the bitterness. "Someone educated and well-spoken, who clearly came from a better situation than what I can offer here," Russell corrected gently. "Your letters were well-written, thoughtful. You are obviously accustomed to a more refined life than what exists on a cattle ranch in Idaho." Hannah set the plates in the wash basin and turned to face him. "My father was a clerk, and we lived modestly but comfortably. I attended school through the 8th grade and helped my mother with her sewing to bring in extra money. We were not wealthy, Russell, and after my father died 2 years ago, things became quite difficult financially. My mother took in more sewing work, and I helped as much as I could, but we were barely getting by." She swallowed hard, remembering. When I met James, he seemed like the answer to all our problems. He was a junior partner in a law firm, charming and attentive, and he promised we would marry as soon as he made senior partner. I believed him completely. And when you told him about the baby, Russell's voice was quiet but steady. He gave me $50 and told me to handle the situation discreetly. When I refused, he said I was a foolish girl who had tried to trap him, and that he would deny everything if I made any trouble. Hannah felt the familiar shame and anger rise in her chest. My mother was horrified when she found out. She said I had brought disgrace on our family and that she could not afford to support both of us. She gave me enough money for the train ticket west and told me not to write to her again. Russell stood and crossed to where she stood by the wash basin. He did not touch her, but his presence was solid and comforting. Then that man was a fool, and your mother was wrong to turn you out. A child is not a disgrace, Miss Dawson. It is a blessing, no matter the circumstances of its creation. Hannah looked up at him, this man who had shown her more compassion in a few days than her own family had in months, and felt something shift in her chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of trust, the first fragile stirring of hope that perhaps her life was not ruined after all. I will do my best to be worthy of the chance that you are giving me, she whispered. Just be yourself, Russell said simply. That will be more than enough. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and hot, and Hannah woke in the small bedroom she had claimed with her heart pounding. She had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of what this day would mean, how her entire life was about to change. She washed carefully in the basin Russell had filled for her the night before, then dressed in the new gray dress she had finished just the previous evening. The fit was not perfect, but it was as good as she could manage given her circumstances, and the color brought out the blue in her eyes. She came downstairs to find Russell already dressed in a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair still damp from washing. He looked up as she descended, and something in his expression made her feel beautiful, despite her swollen belly and the shadows of exhaustion under her eyes. "You look very nice," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Thank you. So do you." They rode to town in the wagon, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. Ruby City seemed busier than it had been on the day Hannah arrived, with people going about their morning business, and she noticed several curious glances as Russell helped her down in front of the small whitewashed church at the edge of town. Preacher Morrison was a thin man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a weathered face. He shook Russell's hand and bowed politely to Hannah. "Miss Dawson, it is a pleasure to meet you. Russell has told me you have traveled a long way to be here." "Yes, preacher, from Philadelphia." Hannah kept her hands folded in front of her, hoping the folds of her dress concealed her condition. If the preacher noticed her pregnancy, he gave no sign. "Well, you are most welcome to our community. Shall we proceed? I believe Mrs. Chen and her husband have agreed to serve as witnesses." The ceremony was brief and simple, conducted in the cool interior of the church with only the preacher, the Chinese couple who ran the general store, and the thin summer light filtering through the plain glass windows as witnesses. Hannah's voice shook as she repeated the vows, promising to love, honor, and obey this man she barely knew, and she felt Russell's strong fingers close around hers as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Preacher Morrison announced. "Russell, you may kiss your bride." Russell bent his head and pressed his lips to Hannah's in a chaste, gentle kiss that lasted only a moment but sent a warm shiver through her entire body. When he pulled back, his gray eyes held a promise that made her feel safer than she had in months. They signed the marriage certificate, accepted the congratulations of the Chens and the preacher, and then returned to the wagon. As Russell helped her up onto the seat, Mrs. Chen hurried over with a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Congratulations to you both," the older woman said with a warm smile. "I packed you some sweet buns for your journey home. May you have a long and happy marriage blessed with many children." Hannah accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. That is very kind of you." As they rode back toward the ranch, now as husband and wife, Hannah unwrapped one of the sweet buns and offered it to Russell. He took a bite and nodded appreciatively, and they shared the small wedding feast in companionable silence as the wagon rolled along the familiar road. "Thank you," Hannah said finally, breaking the quiet, "for giving me your name, for accepting my child, for all of it. I know this is not the marriage you imagined when you placed that advertisement." Russell glanced at her, his expression serious. "Maybe not, but it is the marriage we have now, and I intend to make the best of it. I hope you will too." "I will," Hannah promised, and she meant it with her whole heart. Life on the ranch quickly settled into a routine. Hannah took over the cooking and cleaning, grateful to have productive work to occupy her hands and mind. She discovered that Russell kept a well-stocked pantry, and she began experimenting with the ingredients available, preparing meals that went beyond the simple fare he had been making for himself. She swept and scrubbed, washed clothes in the big copper tub, and began making curtains for the windows from fabric she found in a trunk in one of the unused bedrooms. Russell worked from dawn until dusk, tending to his cattle, repairing fences, and managing the dozens of tasks required to keep a ranch running. He was patient with Hannah's questions about ranch life, explaining the rhythms of the seasons and the demands of the work. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the Idaho hills and talking about their days. As the weeks passed, Hannah felt her body continue to change with the pregnancy. The baby moved more now, strong kicks and rolls that reminded her constantly of the life growing inside her. One evening in late September, as she and Russell sat at the kitchen table going over the household accounts, she gasped as a particularly vigorous kick caught her by surprise. Russell looked up immediately, concern evident in his face. "Are you all right?" "Yes, the baby is just very active tonight." Without thinking, Hannah placed her hand on her belly where she had felt the movement. Russell hesitated, then asked quietly, "May I?" He gestured toward her stomach. Hannah felt her cheeks warm, but she nodded. Russell reached across the table and placed his large, calloused hand gently against her belly. They waited in silence for a moment, and then the baby kicked again, hard enough that Russell's eyes widened in surprise. "That is strong," he said, wonder evident in his voice. "Is it always like that?" "More and more lately." Hannah found herself smiling at his reaction. "I think he or she is running out of room." Russell kept his hand there for another moment, feeling another small movement, and when he pulled away, there was something new in his eyes, a protectiveness that had not been there before. "You should rest more. You are on your feet too much during the day." "I am fine, truly. The work keeps me occupied and prevents me from dwelling on worries." "What worries?" Russell asked, his brow furrowing. Hannah folded her hands in her lap. "That I will not be a good mother, that something will go wrong with the birth, that you will regret taking on this burden." She had not meant to voice these fears aloud, but they spilled out before she could stop them. Russell reached across and covered her hands with his own. "You will be an excellent mother, because you already care so deeply about this child's welfare. As for the birth, we will send for the midwife when the time comes. Mrs. Patterson has delivered most of the babies in this county for the past 20 years, and she knows what she is doing. And you are not a burden, Hannah. You are my wife, and this is my child now. I meant what I said that first day." His words, spoken with such quiet conviction, made Hannah's eyes sting with tears. "I am not sure what I did to deserve such kindness from you, but I am grateful for it every single day." "You do not need to deserve kindness. You just need to accept it." Russell squeezed her hands gently, then released them and returned to the account books. "Now, let us finish these figures so we can both get some rest. Tomorrow, I need to ride out to the north pasture to check on the new fence line, and I would like you to come with me if you feel up to it. The ride is not too rough, and I think you would enjoy seeing more of the ranch." Hannah agreed, and the next day found herself seated beside Russell in the wagon as they traveled across his land. The autumn air was crisp and clear, and the landscape had taken on the golden tones of the season. Russell pointed out various landmarks and explained his plans for expanding the herd in the coming year. Hannah listened attentively, impressed by the depth of his knowledge and the careful thought he put into managing the ranch. They stopped by a small creek for a midday rest, and Russell helped Hannah down from the wagon. She stretched her back, which had been aching more frequently as the baby grew, and walked to the water's edge. The creek bubbled over smooth stones, clear and cold, and she could see small fish darting in the shallows. "This is beautiful," she said, as Russell came to stand beside her. "It is so peaceful here." "This was one of the first places I found when I started exploring the property after my parents died," Russell said. "I used to come here when the loneliness got too heavy. Something about the sound of the water made things seem more bearable." Hannah looked up at him, seeing the man behind the stoic rancher facade. "Do you still get lonely?" Russell met her gaze directly. Not as much since you arrived. The house feels different now, more like a home than just a place to sleep between workdays. His honesty touched her deeply. I feel the same way. I was so frightened when I stepped off that stagecoach, certain you would send me away in disgrace. But you have made me feel welcome and safe, and that is something I never expected to find again. You are easy to welcome, Russell said simply. You work hard. You do not complain about the isolation or the difficult conditions. And you make the best biscuits I have ever tasted. Hannah laughed, the sound bright and genuine. Well, if I have won you over with my biscuits, then I suppose I am doing something right. They shared the lunch she had packed, sitting on a fallen log near the creek, and for the first time since her life had fallen apart in Philadelphia, Hannah felt something like contentment. The future was still uncertain, and she knew the birth would bring its own challenges, but in this moment, beside this good man who had chosen to stand by her, she felt a peace she had not known in months. As October arrived and the air grew cooler, Hannah began preparing for the baby's arrival in earnest. She sewed small gowns and blankets from soft fabric Russell brought back from town, and together they moved a cradle down from the attic that had belonged to Russell as an infant. Hannah lined it with fresh padding and arranged it in the bedroom that would become the nursery, adjacent to the room she still occupied separately from Russell. Their marriage remained unconsummated, a practical arrangement rather than a romantic union, but Hannah found herself growing increasingly aware of Russell as a man, rather than simply her benefactor. She noticed the strength in his arms as he carried firewood, the kindness in his eyes when he asked about her comfort, the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. She caught herself watching him more often, wondering what it would be like if their marriage were built on more than necessity and compassion. One evening in late October, as the first frost painted the windows and they sat together by the fire after supper, Russell cleared his throat in a way that indicated he had something important to say. Hannah, I want you to know that I consider this baby mine in every way that matters. When he or she arrives, I will be the father in all respects. But I also want you to know that I do not expect anything from you beyond the partnership we have already established. You do not owe me anything simply because I gave you my name. Hannah set down the baby gown she had been hemming and looked at him across the firelight. I know you do not expect anything, Russell. That is one of the things that makes you such a good man. But I need you to know that this arrangement we have, it has come to mean more to me than simply a marriage of convenience. You have shown me more respect and care than the man who claimed to love me ever did, and I find myself hoping that perhaps, in time, we might build something more than just a practical partnership. Russell's expression shifted, surprise and something warmer flickering in his gray eyes. I would like that, he said quietly. I married you thinking it would be a practical arrangement, a solution to both our problems. But having you here, talking with you every day, watching you prepare for this baby, I find myself feeling things I did not expect to feel. Hannah's heart began to beat faster. What kind of things? Protective, proud, happy. Russell leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. When I see you in my house, wearing my ring, I do not think about the circumstances that brought you here. I just feel grateful that you are here at all. I feel the same way, Hannah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. When I think about my future now, I cannot imagine it anywhere but here with you. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and then Russell stood and crossed to where Hannah sat. He reached out and gently touched her face, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender against her skin. May I kiss you? Not because we are married and I have some right to it, but because I want to, because I am coming to care for you very much. Yes, Hannah breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm and gentle, and nothing like the hurried, demanding kisses James had given her. This kiss was different, patient and thorough, speaking of respect and growing affection. When Russell finally pulled back, Hannah felt dizzy and warm, her heart racing. I have wanted to do that for weeks, Russell admitted, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. But I did not want to presume. You can presume, Hannah said, covering his hand with her own. I am your wife, Russell, and I want to be your wife in every sense of the word when I am recovered from the birth. His eyes darkened with something that made her stomach flutter. I will wait as long as necessary. I have learned patience over the years, and you are worth waiting for." They stayed close together by the fire for the rest of the evening, and when they finally went upstairs to their separate rooms, Russell kissed her again at her door, a long, slow kiss that promised more for the future. November brought cold winds and the first snow, and Hannah felt her body growing increasingly heavy and uncomfortable as the baby dropped lower in preparation for birth. Russell insisted she rest more, taking over many of the household chores despite his already demanding work schedule. He brought the wood in for the stove, carried the water from the well, and even attempted to make dinner on several occasions, though his cooking skills remained rudimentary at best. "You are supposed to be the rancher, not the housewife," Hannah protested one afternoon as she found him scrubbing the kitchen floor. "And you are supposed to be preparing to bring a child into the world, which is considerably more important than maintaining my masculine pride," Russell countered, not pausing in his work. "Sit down before you topple over. You look exhausted." Hannah obeyed because her back was aching fiercely, and her ankles had swollen to an alarming degree. She lowered herself carefully into a chair and watched her husband work, feeling a rush of affection for this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. "Russell, can I ask you something?" "Of course." He wrung out the rag and sat back on his heels. "Have you thought about names for the baby?" Russell wiped his hands on his trousers and stood, coming over to lean against the table near her chair. "I have, actually. I thought if it is a boy, we might name him Thomas, after my father, but only if that suits you. I know you might have your own preferences." Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes, though she seemed to cry at the smallest things these days. "Thomas is a fine name, and if it is a girl, I was hoping you might have thoughts on that. My mother's name was Margaret, but it is your choice entirely." "What about Sarah?" Hannah suggested. "It was my grandmother's name, and she was the kindest person I ever knew before I met you." Russell smiled, one of his rare full smiles that transformed his entire face. "Sarah Garrett. I like that very much." The labor pains began on a cold afternoon in late November, nearly 3 weeks before Hannah had expected them. She was folding laundry when the first contraction gripped her, sharp and unmistakable, and she had to grab the edge of the table to steady herself. Russell had ridden out to check on the cattle in the near pasture, but he had promised to return before dark. Hannah tried to remain calm as the contractions continued, timing them as Mrs. Patterson had instructed during her visits to check on the pregnancy's progress. They were still far apart, giving her time, but she knew she needed to get word to the midwife soon. She managed to make her way out to the porch and ring the large bell they kept there for emergencies, hoping Russell would hear it and return quickly. Within 20 minutes, she heard the sound of hoofbeats, and Russell appeared, riding hard. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped and took the porch steps 2 at a time. "What is wrong?" "The baby is coming," Hannah managed between contractions. "We need Mrs. Patterson." Russell's face went pale, but his voice remained steady. "How far apart are the pains?" "About 15 minutes, I think." "All right. I'm going to ride to the Patterson place and bring her back. It should not take more than an hour, maybe less if I push hard. Can you manage until then?" Hannah nodded, gripping the porch railing as another contraction rolled through her. "Go, I will be fine." Russell hesitated only a moment longer, then pressed a quick, fierce kiss to her forehead. "You are the strongest woman I know. You can do this." Then he was back on his horse and racing down the road toward the Patterson homestead, 5 miles away. Hannah made her way back into the house and upstairs to the bedroom she had been using. She changed into the nightgown she had prepared for the birth and tried to stay calm as the contractions grew closer together. She found herself praying, something she had not done much since her mother had cast her out, pleading with God to let both her and the baby survive this ordeal, to give her the chance to build the life she had found with Russell. Mrs. Patterson arrived with Russell in what felt like both an eternity and no time at all. The midwife was a sturdy woman in her 60s with capable hands and a no-nonsense manner that was instantly reassuring. She shooed Russell out of the room and began examining Hannah with practiced efficiency. "First baby?" Mrs. Patterson asked as she felt Hannah's belly. "Yes," Hannah gasped as another contraction seized her. "Well, you are progressing nicely, but we have got some hours ahead of us yet. First babies like to take their time." The midwife smiled encouragingly. "Your husband was beside himself during the ride back. I have delivered a lot of babies in this county, but I have rarely seen a man so worried about his wife." The labor continued through the evening and into the night, long hours of pain and exhaustion that blurred together. Mrs. Patterson remained calm and encouraging throughout, and Russell stayed downstairs, pacing according to the creaking floorboards Hannah could hear between contractions. As the night wore on and the pain intensified, Hannah found herself crying out for him. Mrs. Patterson went to the door and called down, "Mr. Garrett, your wife is asking for you." Russell appeared in the doorway within seconds, his hair disheveled and his face etched with worry. "I am here, Hannah. What do you need?" "Just stay," she pleaded, reaching for his hand. "Please do not leave me." Russell looked to Mrs. Patterson, who nodded her approval. "Some women do better with their husbands present. Just stay out of my way and do not faint on me." Russell moved to Hannah's side and took her hand, letting her grip it as hard as she needed during the contractions. He wiped her face with a cool cloth and murmured encouragement, his steady presence anchoring her through the worst of the pain. Hours passed, the night deepening toward dawn, and finally Mrs. Patterson announced that it was time to push. The final stage of labor was the hardest thing Hannah had ever endured, her body racked with effort and pain beyond anything she had imagined. But Russell stayed beside her, his hand in hers, his voice steady and certain, telling her she was strong. She could do this. The baby was almost here. And then, just as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky outside the window, a thin, outraged wail filled the room. "It is a boy!" Mrs. Patterson announced, wrapping the infant in a clean cloth. "A healthy boy with a fine set of lungs." Hannah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure, and watched through tears as the midwife cleaned the baby and then placed him in her arms. He was red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in indignation. "Hello, Thomas," Hannah whispered, touching his soft cheek with one trembling finger. "I am your mother." She looked up to find Russell staring at the baby with an expression of such wonder that it took her breath away. "Would you like to hold your son?" she asked softly. Russell's eyes snapped to hers. "My son," he repeated, as though testing the words. Then, very carefully, he reached out and took the baby from her arms. He held the infant with unexpected confidence, supporting the small head with one large hand, and the baby immediately quieted, as though recognizing the steadiness of the man who held him. "Hello, Thomas," Russell said quietly, and Hannah saw his eyes glisten with unshed tears. "Welcome to the family. I promise you, I will do my best to be the father you deserve." Hannah felt her heart overflow with love for both of them, this tiny new life, and the man who had claimed him without hesitation. Mrs. Patterson finished attending to Hannah and then discreetly left the room to give them privacy, murmuring something about making tea. Russell sat carefully on the edge of the bed, still cradling Thomas. "He is perfect, Hannah. Absolutely perfect." "He is," Hannah agreed, reaching out to touch Russell's arm. "Thank you for staying with me. I do not think I could have endured it without you. I would not have been anywhere else." Russell looked from the baby to her, his gray eyes intense. "I know I am not his blood father, but looking at him now, I cannot imagine loving him any more if I were. He is ours, Hannah, ours together." "Yes," Hannah whispered, overcome with emotion. "He is ours." The weeks following Thomas's birth passed in a blur of sleepless nights and the constant demands of a newborn. Russell proved to be an attentive and helpful father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Hannah for feeding, changing soiled cloths without complaint, and spending hours walking the floor with Thomas when the infant was fussy. During the day, he continued to manage the ranch, but he adjusted his schedule to be closer to the house more often, checking on Hannah and the baby regularly. Hannah's body slowly recovered from the ordeal of childbirth, and as her strength returned, so did her awareness of the deeper feelings she had developed for Russell. Watching him with Thomas, seeing the gentleness and patience he displayed with their son, made her fall in love with him in a way she had never loved James. This was not the shallow infatuation of youth, but something deeper and more enduring, built on respect and partnership and shared purpose. One evening in late December, after Hannah had recovered sufficiently and Thomas had settled into a more predictable routine, she found Russell standing by the baby's cradle in the nursery, watching their son sleep with an expression of profound contentment. "He has your chin," Russell said softly as Hannah came to stand beside him. "I noticed it today when he was looking up at me. The shape is exactly like yours." Hannah studied Thomas's small face in the lamplight. perhaps. But he has your serious expression when he is concentrating. I swear he looks exactly like you when he is trying to figure out his own fists." Russell smiled and slipped his arm around Hannah's waist, drawing her close to his side. The gesture felt natural now, after weeks of shared responsibility and growing intimacy. "He is fortunate to have you as his mother. You are doing a wonderful job with him." "We are doing a wonderful job," Hannah corrected, leaning into Russell's solid warmth. "I could not manage without you." They stood together in the quiet nursery for a few moments longer, and then Russell turned to face her fully. "Hannah, I want you to know that these past few months with you and Thomas have been the happiest of my life. I know our marriage began as a practical arrangement, born of your necessity and my loneliness, but it has become so much more than that for me. I have come to love you, truly and deeply, not as a matter of duty or gratitude, but because of who you are and what we have built together." Hannah felt tears well in her eyes, but they were tears of joy this time. "I love you too, Russell. I did not think I could ever trust a man again after what James did to me, but you have shown me what real love looks like. It is not grand gestures or pretty words, but daily kindness, steadfast support, and choosing to stand by someone even when it is difficult." Russell cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had spilled over. "I will stand by you for the rest of my life, Hannah Garrett. You and Thomas are my family, my purpose, my home." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Hannah felt the last of her defenses crumble away. When they finally parted, both breathless, Russell took her hand and led her to their separate bedrooms, pausing between the two doors. "I meant what I said before about not expecting anything from you," Russell said, his voice rough with emotion. "But if you are ready, if you want to truly be my wife in every way, I would very much like to share a room with you." Hannah looked up at this man who had given her everything, his name, his protection, his love, and felt certain in a way she had never been before. "I am ready. I want to be with you, Russell, fully and completely." He smiled, that rare, transforming smile that made her heart race, and opened the door to his room. "Then come with me, wife, and let me show you how much you mean to me." That night, Hannah finally became Russell's wife in every sense, and the tenderness and passion they shared erased the last lingering shadows of her past. Russell was patient and gentle, attentive to her needs and her lingering physical sensitivity from the birth, and Hannah discovered that intimacy could be something beautiful when built on genuine love and respect. The winter passed peacefully, with Hannah, Russell, and Thomas settling into the rhythms of family life. The ranch work continued despite the cold and snow, and Hannah learned to manage the household efficiently while caring for an infant. Thomas grew and thrived, his personality beginning to emerge as he became more alert and interactive. He smiled early, always seeming happiest when Russell came in from his work and picked him up, and Hannah's heart melted every time she watched her husband and son together. As spring arrived in 1883 and the snow began to melt, revealing the first green shoots of new grass, Russell announced at breakfast one morning that he needed to make a supply run to Ruby City. "Would you and Thomas like to come along? The weather is fine, and I thought you might enjoy getting out of the house." Hannah eagerly agreed, and by mid-morning, they were traveling down the now familiar road to town, with Thomas bundled against Hannah's chest. The landscape had transformed since her arrival the previous summer, and Hannah marveled at how much had changed in less than a year. She had arrived frightened and alone, carrying a child conceived in shame, and now she was returning as a respected rancher's wife with a healthy son and a husband she loved deeply. In town, they stopped at the general store, where Mrs. Chen greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Garrett, how wonderful to see you, and this must be your little one. Oh, he is precious." Hannah unwrapped Thomas enough for Mrs. Chen to admire him properly, and the older woman clucked approvingly. "He has his father's strong features. Mr. Garrett, you must be very proud." "I am," Russell said firmly, his hand coming to rest on Hannah's shoulder in a gesture of unmistakable pride and possession. "He is a fine boy." As they continued through the town, making various stops for supplies, Hannah noticed that people greeted them with genuine friendliness. No one looked at her with suspicion or judgment, and several women stopped to admire Thomas and offer advice on child rearing. It was clear that the community had accepted her as Russell's wife without question, and the relief she felt was profound. On the way back to the ranch, Russell seemed unusually quiet, and finally Hannah asked, "Is something troubling you?" Russell glanced at her, then back at the road. Not troubling exactly. I have just been thinking about the future. The ranch is doing well, and with beef prices up, I am considering expanding the herd significantly next year. It will mean more work, possibly hiring some help during roundup time, but it would also mean more security for our family. Our family, Hannah repeated, loving the sound of those words. I think that sounds like an excellent plan. You have worked so hard to build this ranch, Russell. You deserve to see it prosper. I want to build something lasting, Russell said. Something we can pass on to Thomas and any other children we might have. I want our sons and daughters to have opportunities, to know they have a solid foundation to build on. Hannah placed her hand over Russell's on the reins. Other children? Russell smiled, a touch of color rising in his cheeks. If you are willing. I know it has only been a few months since Thomas was born, but I would like to have more children with you, Hannah. A house full, if we are blessed with them. I would like that too, Hannah said softly. A house full of children, growing up on this beautiful land, knowing they are loved and wanted. It sounds perfect. The summer of 1883 brought long, hot days filled with hard work and simple joys. Hannah had fully recovered her strength thus and threw herself into improving the ranch house, planting a vegetable garden near the kitchen, and caring for Thomas, who was growing bigger and more active by the day. Russell hired 2 young men to help with the cattle during the busiest season, and the ranch continued to prosper. In late August, Hannah realized she had missed her monthly courses and felt a familiar flutter of nerves and excitement. When she told Russell the news that she suspected she was pregnant again, his reaction was one of unrestrained joy. He picked her up and spun her around carefully, laughing in a way she had never heard before. Another baby, he said wonderingly, setting her down and placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Thomas will have a brother or sister. Hannah, you have made me the happiest man alive. We are making this family together, Hannah reminded him, covering his hand with her own. Every step of the way, we are building this together. The second pregnancy was easier than the first in many ways, largely because Hannah was not carrying the burden of shame and fear she had borne with Thomas. She was a married woman in her own home, expecting her husband's child, and the difference in her mental state made the physical challenges more bearable. Russell was even more protective and attentive than before, and Thomas, now walking and babbling constantly, seemed fascinated by the changes in his mother's body. In the spring of 1884, Hannah delivered a daughter with Russell and Mrs. Patterson both present. The labor was shorter than with Thomas, and when the midwife placed the squalling infant in Hannah's arms, Russell's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah," he said reverently, touching the baby's tiny hand. "Our little Sarah. She is beautiful, Hannah, just like her mother." Thomas, now 18 months old, was brought in to meet his sister and regarded her with solemn curiosity before declaring "baby" in his limited vocabulary. Russell lifted his son up so he could see better, and Hannah felt her heart might burst with the love she had for her family. The years that followed brought both challenges and blessings. The ranch continued to grow and prosper under Russell's skilled management, and he eventually bought additional land from a neighboring property, expanding their holdings significantly. They added on to the house, building more bedrooms as their family grew. After Sarah came another son, Michael, in 1886, and then twin daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret, in 1888. Hannah proved to be a capable ranch wife, managing the household, caring for their children, and even helping with the ranch work when needed. She taught the children to read and write at the kitchen table, preparing them for eventual attendance at the school that had been built in Ruby City. Russell was a devoted father, patient and loving with each of their children, while also teaching them the value of hard work and responsibility. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who idolized his father and worked alongside him on the ranch as soon as he was old enough. He never questioned that Russell was his father in every way that mattered, and Russell never treated him any differently than the children who had been born to their marriage. The truth of Thomas's parentage was something Russell and Hannah had agreed to share with him when he was older, but it was a detail rather than a defining characteristic of who he was. One evening in the fall of 1890, after the children had been put to bed, and Hannah and Russell sat together on the porch watching the stars, Hannah reflected on how far they had come from that first nervous meeting in Ruby City 8 years earlier. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Agreeing to marry me despite the pregnancy, taking on all the challenges that came with that decision?" Russell was silent for a moment, his arm tightening around her shoulders. Not for a single second. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You gave me a family, Hannah, a real family with love and laughter and purpose. Everything good in my life stems from the day you stepped off that stagecoach. I was so terrified, Hannah remembered. I thought for certain you would send me away once you knew the truth. I almost cannot imagine what that would have cost us both, Russell said. All of this, everything we have built together, would never have existed. Thomas would have been raised by someone else if he survived at all. Sarah, Michael, and the twins would never have been born. The thought of a world without them, without you, is unbearable. Hannah turned to face him, studying the face she had come to love so deeply over the years. There were a few more lines around his eyes now, a touch of gray at his temples, but to her, he was more handsome than ever. You took a chance on a desperate woman and gave her more than she ever dared to hope for. You gave me love, respect, a home, and a family. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for your kindness and trying to be worthy of it. Russell cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes intense in the lamplight, spilling from the windows. You have been worthy of it every day since. You are the strongest, most resilient woman I have ever known. You took your broken circumstances and built something beautiful from them. I am in awe of you, Hannah Garrett. He kissed her then, tender and deep, and Hannah felt the same spark of desire and love that had only grown stronger over the years. They went upstairs together to the bedroom they had shared for years now, leaving the quiet ranch house behind, and reaffirmed their love for each other in the intimate privacy of their marriage. The children grew and thrived over the following years. Thomas proved himself an excellent horseman and cattleman, working alongside Russell with increasing skill and responsibility. By the time he was 16 in 1898, he was managing significant portions of the ranch operation and showing every indication that he would be ready to take over when the time came. Sarah was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. Michael had his father's quiet strength and his mother's compassionate heart. The twins were lively and mischievous, keeping Hannah constantly on her toes. In the summer of 1899, as Hannah and Russell celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary, with a rare evening alone while the older children watched the younger ones, they reflected on the unexpected journey their lives had taken. "Do you remember how I told you that first day that I wanted a partner to help me build something that would last?" Russell asked as they walked hand in hand around the ranch property in the cooling evening air. "I remember every word of that conversation," Hannah replied. "It was the moment I began to hope that perhaps my life was not ruined after all. Look at what we have built," Russell said, gesturing at the prosperous ranch spread out around them. "Not just the physical structures and the cattle and the land, though those are impressive enough. But look at our children, Hannah. 5 healthy, happy, well-adjusted young people who will go out into the world and make their own marks. We built that together, you and I. We created a family and a legacy that will continue long after we are gone." Hannah leaned into his side, her head resting on his shoulder. "I never imagined I could be this happy. When I left Philadelphia, I thought my life was essentially over, that I would spend my remaining years struggling to survive and living with the shame of my mistakes. Instead, I found you, and you gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams." "We gave each other that life," Russell corrected. "I was barely living before you arrived, just existing from day to day with no real purpose beyond keeping the ranch running. You brought joy and meaning to everything. You made this house a home and gave me reasons to work for something beyond mere survival." They stopped walking and turned to face each other under the vast Idaho sky, now painted with the first stars of evening. "I love you, Russell Garrett," Hannah said, her voice strong and certain. "I have loved you for so many years now that I can hardly remember what it felt like not to love you. You are my partner, my best friend, the father of my children, and the great love of my life." "And you are mine," Russell replied, pulling her close. "From the moment you stepped off that stagecoach looking so frightened and determined, you captured something in me. I did not recognize it as love at first, but it has grown into the defining relationship of my life. Everything I am, everything I have accomplished, is better because you are beside me." They kissed under the emerging stars, two people who had found each other through desperate circumstances and built a love story that had endured and deepened over nearly 2 decades. When they finally drew apart, Russell took Hannah's hand and they continued their walk, talking about the future and the plans they had for the ranch and their children. In 1900, Thomas turned 18 and took on even more responsibility for the ranch, showing wisdom and maturity beyond his years. One evening after supper, Russell asked him to stay behind while the rest of the family dispersed to their evening activities. Hannah remained as well, and Thomas looked between his parents with curiosity. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "Not wrong," Russell said carefully. "But your mother and I have something important we need to share with you. Something we should have told you before now, but we wanted to wait until you were old enough to fully understand." Thomas's expression became serious. "All right, I am listening." Hannah reached across the table and took her son's hand. "Thomas, you know that your father and I love you more than words can express. You are our firstborn, and you have brought us nothing but pride and joy since the day you were born." "But," Thomas prompted when she paused. Russell leaned forward, his gray eyes steady on his son's face. "But I am not your biological father. Your mother was pregnant when she arrived in Ruby City to marry me. The man who fathered you wanted nothing to do with either of you, and your mother came west seeking a new start." Thomas sat very still, processing this information. "You are not my real father?" His voice was quiet, almost stunned. "I am your real father in every way that matters," Russell said firmly. "I was there when you were born. I have raised you, taught you, loved you every single day of your life. Biology does not make a man a father, Thomas. Showing up and doing the work, that is what makes a father." "Did you know when you married Mother?" Thomas asked, looking between them. "I did," Russell confirmed. "She told me the truth the day she arrived, and I made the decision then and there that if she would have me as her husband, then you would be my child. I gave you my name and claimed you as my own, and I have never regretted that decision for one moment." Thomas turned to his mother, his expression troubled. "Why did you not tell me before?" "We wanted you to grow up secure in your place in this family," Hannah explained, tears sliding down her cheeks. "We did not want you to feel different from your brothers and sisters or to question your father's love for you. But you are a man now, and you deserve to know the truth of your origins, even if it changes nothing about who you are or where you belong." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and Hannah felt her heart aching with worry that this revelation might damage their relationship. But then her son squeezed her hand and looked at Russell with an expression of deep emotion. "It does not change anything," Thomas said finally. "You are my father. You have been my father for 18 years, and no revelation about biology is going to change that fact. I do not care about the man who gave me life, but took no responsibility for it. I care about the man who taught me to ride, who worked beside me in the pastures, who stayed up with me when I was sick, and who has shown me what it means to be a good man. That man is you, Dad." Russell's eyes filled with tears, and he reached across to grip his son's shoulder. "Thank you, Thomas. That means more to me than you can possibly know." "I am glad you told me," Thomas continued. "It explains some things I wondered about, and I appreciate your honesty. But it does not change how I feel about either of you or my place in this family. I am Thomas Garrett, son of Russell and Hannah Garrett, and that is the only identity that matters to me." Hannah stood and moved around the table to embrace her son, crying openly now. "I love you so much. You have grown into such an incredible young man, and I am so very proud to be your mother." "I am proud to be your son," Thomas replied, holding her tightly. "Both of you have given me everything I needed to become who I am. I could not have asked for better parents." The three of them held each other for a long moment, and Hannah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The last secret had been revealed, and rather than causing division, it had only reinforced the bonds of their family. Thomas knew the truth now, and he had chosen to embrace the love that had raised him rather than rejecting it because of biological technicalities. Life continued its steady rhythm on the ranch through the early years of the new century. Sarah went away to school in Boise in 1902, determined to become a teacher, and Hannah and Russell were immensely proud of their daughter's ambition and intelligence. Michael showed an aptitude for working with horses and began training them for sale, adding another income stream to the ranch. The twins were growing into capable young women, helping their mother with the household, and showing interest in the ranch operations as well. Thomas met and courted a young woman from a neighboring ranch, Emma Harrison, and in the spring of 1904, Russell and Hannah attended their eldest son's wedding with hearts full of joy. Watching Thomas exchange vows with his bride, seeing the happiness on his face, Hannah felt the full weight of how far they had all come from that desperate day when she had arrived in Ruby City, carrying an illegitimate child and hoping for mercy. "He is going to be happy," Russell murmured in her ear as they watched the ceremony. "Emma is a good woman, and Thomas knows how to be a good husband because he learned from watching us." "We did well," Hannah agreed softly. "Against all odds, we built something beautiful." In 1906, Thomas and Emma welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Hannah after her grandmother. Russell and Hannah became grandparents with all the joy and wonder that role entailed, and Hannah felt her heart overflow as she held her tiny namesake and reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Who would have thought," she said to Russell as they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset on yet another peaceful evening. "That frightened woman who stepped off the stagecoach 24 years ago could end up here, holding her granddaughter, surrounded by family and love." "I knew," Russell said quietly. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were strong enough to survive anything and build something beautiful from the ashes of your past. I just had to give you the opportunity and the support to do it." "You gave me everything," Hannah said, turning to look at the man who had been her partner through all these years. His hair was mostly gray now, and there were deep lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still the same steady, honorable man who had offered her mercy when she had nowhere else to turn. "My whole life, everything good that has happened to me, stems from your decision to accept me as I was and give me your name. And my whole life became worth living the day you arrived," Russell countered. "We saved each other, Hannah. That is what makes our story special." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Idaho sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and Hannah reflected on all they had experienced together, the fear and uncertainty of their beginning, the gradual building of trust and affection, the growth of their family, the challenges they had overcome, and the deep, abiding love that had sustained them through it all. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow and flourish. Sarah returned from teaching school in Boise to marry a local doctor and settled in Ruby City, where she could be close to her family. Michael married a woman who shared his love of horses, and they established a successful horse training business on a portion of the ranch land that Russell deeded to them. The twins both married well, one to a rancher and one to a merchant, and they too remained in the area, ensuring that the Garrett family continued to be a significant presence in the community. Russell and Hannah watched their children build their own families and lives with profound satisfaction. The ranch that Russell had inherited as a 17-year-old boy and built into a thriving enterprise was now a true family legacy, with Thomas managing the cattle operation and Michael overseeing the horse training, while Russell gradually stepped back from the day-to-day work. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1912, their children organized a large celebration at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from all over the county. It was a warm August day, much like the day Hannah had first arrived, and as she stood beside Russell greeting their guests, she marveled at the transformation of her life. Thomas gave a speech during the celebration, raising his glass to his parents. 30 years ago, my mother arrived in Ruby City as a mail-order bride, and my father made a decision that would change all of our lives. He chose love over judgment, family over convention, and in doing so, he created this incredible legacy that surrounds us today. Dad, you taught me what it means to be a man of honor and integrity. Mom, you showed me that strength comes in many forms and that the past does not have to define the future. To Russell and Hannah Garrett, the finest parents anyone could ask for. The crowd raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment, and Hannah felt Russell's arm tighten around her waist. She leaned into him, this man who had been her salvation and her love for 3 decades, and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a second chance at life." "Thank you for making that life worth living," Russell replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. As the celebration continued around them, with their children and grandchildren laughing and playing, with neighbors and friends sharing stories and good wishes, Hannah reflected that she had indeed been given a second chance, and she had made the most of it. The shame and fear of her arrival in Idaho had been transformed into a life of purpose, love, and family that exceeded anything she had dared to hope for on that long-ago August day. The years continued to pass peacefully. Russell and Hannah grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They spent their days working in the garden Hannah had expanded over the years, playing with their growing number of grandchildren and sitting on their porch watching the sun set over the land they had built their life upon. In the spring of 1920, as they sat together on that same porch where they had spent so many evenings over the decades, Russell took Hannah's hand and said, "I want you to know that if I could live my life over again, I would not change a single thing. Every moment, every decision, every challenge we faced together was worth it because it brought me here, to this moment, with you." Hannah looked at her husband, seeing past the white hair and weathered skin to the young man who had offered her mercy and a second chance so long ago. "Neither would I," she said softly. "Out of the worst mistake of my life came the greatest blessing. You took my shame and turned it into a family, took my fear and transformed it into love. I have been blessed beyond measure because you chose to see past my circumstances to the person I could become." "You were always that person," Russell said. "I just gave you a safe place to be her." They sat together as the spring evening deepened into twilight. Two people who had found each other through desperate circumstances and built a love story that had spanned decades and generations. Their children were settled and happy, their grandchildren were thriving, and the ranch they had built together would continue for generations to come. Hannah rested her head on Russell's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The mail-order bride who had arrived pregnant and afraid had become the matriarch of a thriving family, the beloved wife of a good man, and the co-creator of a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. "This child will have my name," Russell had said on that first day, and he had kept that promise and so many others over the years. He had given Thomas his name and his love, and in doing so, he had given Hannah back her dignity and her hope. Together, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of her past, and it stood as a testament to the power of love, mercy, and second chances. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky above their beloved Idaho ranch, Hannah and Russell sat together in comfortable silence, their hands clasped, their hearts united, grateful for every moment of the unexpected journey that had brought them together and carried them through a lifetime of love. The story that had begun with fear and desperation had transformed into one of triumph, family, and enduring devotion, proving that sometimes the most beautiful love stories emerge from the most unlikely beginnings. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the thriving ranch that bore the Garrett name, and in the example they set of what it meant to choose love over judgment, family over convention, and hope over despair. The mail-order bride and the cowboy who had given her child his name had created something that would echo through generations, a reminder that redemption was always possible and that true love could be found in the most unexpected places.